In this module, I'm going to demonstrate some of the fundamental things you'll need to know about using Visual Studio. I'm assuming that Visual Studio is installed on a computer, and we'll be using Visual Studio 2012 in class. Unfortunately, I have Visual Studio 2010 installed on this computer that I'm demonstrating with. That said, there is very little difference between Visual Studio 2010 and Visual Studio 2012, so if you follow this demonstration, you should have no problem adapting to the computers in lab. So let me very quickly point out some of the critical things we're going to be looking at, and then we'll drop into a video and you'll see how it's actually done. So I'm going to show you how to launch Visual Studio, that is, how to start up the software to create a Windows Forms application. There are a variety of different applications that you can create, Windows and web-based applications and many others as well, and we'll focus on Windows Forms applications. The next thing I'm going to do is familiarize you with the development environment, and we'll be looking at control classes as they're known, which are pre-written chunks of program code that can be used by simply graphically dragging them and dropping them onto the designer form window, and we'll use this technique in creating a graphical user interface. We'll also take a look at where program code is inserted into the project so that the program has the kind of functionality that the programmer intends for it to. And we'll look at how to save the solution or project, and I'll use these terms interchangeably. There is a difference, but the difference is nothing that I really want to get into. So for all practical purposes, a solution is a project, just kind of a special case of a project. And so we'll look at, once we have created a project, how do we save it, and then how would we transfer that to a backup storage device. And then once the project has been saved, we can, put the project aside, some time can elapse, and then we can, at some point in time in the future, go back and access that existing project and continue working with it, and I'll show how that's done as well. So let me go ahead and switch off here to Visual Studio. So I'm going to launch Visual Studio by going to the Start button, and on the Start menu I'm going to then highlight Programs and find Microsoft Visual Studio in the Start menu, and having selected that, I get a pop-up menu, and the icon is going to look like an infinity symbol. So the executable code can be launched by clicking on this shortcut. And here again, with Visual Studio 2012, Microsoft being Microsoft, will have changed the design of that ever so slightly, but you should be able to adapt to it, should be able to recognize the change and adapt to it very quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and click, at which point I get the start page, and if I want to access an existing project that's been used recently, that I have used in Visual Studio recently, it may show up in this list. I can either launch new project from here, or I can go to the File pull-down menu and choose New Project. And again, if I'm creating a Windows Forms application, this is the approach I take. This is these are the selections I make from the menu. If I'm creating some other type of application, like a web application, I'll make a different menu selection, but for now we're not going to be concerned with that. So we'll be working with Windows Forms application, and I'm going to select Project. And then I have many specific options that I can choose, and I'm just going to choose the Windows Forms application. you'll notice that down at the bottom there's some details that I need to fill into these text boxes. So by default, it wants to name any new project, Windows Forms application. First occurrence would be 1, second occurrence 2, and so forth. I'm going to provide a more descriptive name here, and I'm going to call this Module 1 app. Okay, and I have the Visual Studio software configured so that it's going to automatically save the project, the many files that make up the project. I'm going to store those in a folder that I've created off the root directory called Temp Workspace. And the solution name is the same as my project name. Again, a detail that you need not be terribly concerned about at the moment. And you have an option over here to create a directory for the solution. The default is that that's checked. Leave it that way. It makes managing the files that make up the project much easier if that option's selected. And so I'm going to choose OK. And at this point in time, Visual Studio creates some folders and some infrastructure files and stores them in the location that I previously cited in the file system. And when it is ready to be used, you're going to see a form. Form 1 is the default name. And this is the first form that you have available to use with your graphical user interface. Now, it's possible to create projects with multiple forms, and we'll be doing that. But for now, we're just going to work with one form, and we're going to work with the one form that we're given initially. So you have the form, which is where you develop the graphical user interface, and then you have tools in a toolbox that you can use as the graphical user interface components. Now, technically, these are called control classes. And if I want to put a button on my form that's being used as my graphical user interface, then I would just drag it and drop it onto the form. And I've gone through a process known as instantiation, or I've created an instance of the control class. And technically, this button, known as button 1, is an instance of the button control class, or in object-oriented terminology, an instance of a class is known as an object. So I have placed my first object on the form. And this object has a number of properties that would be attributes. So it has a height attribute. It has a width attribute. It has a back color attribute. It has a text attribute. The text that's displayed on the button face is known as the text attribute. And these various attributes, or at least many of the attributes that are available, can be adjusted at design time, at the time we're actually creating the form, through a interface component called the property window. And so with that object being highlighted, so if I click off on the form's the active object, and I get a different property list over here. But if I want to make some adjustments to this button, I click on it, it becomes the active object. And if I want to change the text property, for instance, to something like click me, I can go through the alphabetized list, find the correct property, double click on the property name in the left column, and then it should highlight the property value in the right column, at which point I can type in something like click me, exclamation. And then if I click on the open form, it's going to record that change, and you'll see that on the button face, the text property of the button's been changed from button 1 to something more descriptive, in this case, click me. So that's how I create the graphical user interface. It's basically go to the toolbox, drag and drop the controls that I want to use onto the form. Each time I do that, I create a new object, And then the real magic behind this is that these objects have not only attributes, otherwise known as properties, but they also have actions that they can perform, which are known as their methods. So objects have properties, that would be their attributes, and they also have methods. Methods are the actions that they can perform. So if I want this button to fire off a message right up here in the title bar of the form that says, you know, something like hello. Well, let's use something that's historical here. Let's have it display hello world. And if you want to Google for that, Google for hello world program, and you'll understand why I say that's something historical. So interesting thing to do in your own time. But I'm going to go ahead and design this program so that when the program is being used by the user, if the user clicks on the button, then it will display hello world in the title bar of the form. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to need to interact with a different component of the integrated development environment. I'm going to need to, instead of using the designer window, I'm going to need to use the code window, and I'm going to need to associate that program code with this object as opposed to some other object that might be on the form. So I'm going to double click on this object, and when I do, the screen transforms into the code window where I can insert some program code. And you'll notice that the cursor has been placed inside of the code window in a very specific container called an event method. Okay, so we'll learn lots about that in class, but this is the event method associated with button 1 that performs an action when the button senses a mouse click, otherwise known as a click event method. And I'm highlighting a component part of that method called the method header, and then within the braces that follow, the opening and closing braces, I have an area known as the body of the method. And within the body of the method, I'm going to place the program code that I want to have executed in the event that someone clicks the mouse on that button. And the program code that I want to have is an assignment statement. So we'll talk more about an assignment statement, one of the fundamental statements that's used in programming languages. And in this case, I'm just going to type it in without a lot of explanation, but I'm going to type in this.text equal, and then inside of double quotes, I'm going to create what's called a string literal. I'm going to display hello world. So I type in hello world inside of double quotes, and I close it off with a semicolon. Okay, so there is a very precise syntax that's associated with the language. Each of these statements have to be written in a very precise way so that eventually I can tell the development environment to take the program code, translate it into a binary format, and give it to the CPU to execute. In fact, I'm about to do that right now. So the only thing I wanted to have happen, I'm going to flip back here to the designer window. I've got a couple of ways of doing that. I have tabs at the top. So for form1.cs, that's the code window. Form1.cs design is the designer window. So I can flip back and forth between the designer window and the code window here with tabs. I can also, if I'm in the code window, I can go over to this area where the component parts of the project are listed. This is known as the Solution Explorer window. And I can find the representation of the form that I want to use in the designer window and double click on it, and that'll also flip me back to that point. All right, so right now I'm in design mode, and I'm providing instructions to the software but I haven't actually translated these into binary format, and I haven't given the instructions, this binary set of instructions, to the computer to execute. To do that, in Visual Studio, I go to the toolbar, I find the Start button, click, and it'll automatically translate the program code. And now this window is actually the form that is being generated when the program has been translated and is in the process of being executed. And so this is an actively running program, and you'll notice that the title bar says Form 1. I'm going to go ahead and click, and you'll see that the action of changing the text in the title bar occurs when I click this button. So the software is able to sense that a click has occurred on this particular object, and when that happens, it executes the program code associated with it, program code in the object's click event method. All right, so I'm going to stop the program from running now, and I'm back to the designer window. So we've written our first program, and we're all excited about that. But let's say that we want to save this project. So, we're running out of time and we need to save. How do I do that? Anytime you start the project, it will save the program code, the source code as it's known, the program code that the user provides. It will save everything and then translate into binary format and execute. So the project has been saved at this point. Now, if I don't want to run the project and save it, I have an alternative way of doing it. I can either click the tool that looks like a diskette, and that'll save the code in the current window, or I can just click the icon next to it that will save everything that's unsaved about the project. So, it might be a safe thing to do just to click that to make sure. Now everything is saved, and it's saved in the temp workspace folder off of the root directory of my computer. I'm going to close up Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to the Start button, and I'm going to choose Computer. And on my hard drive, from the root directory, I'm going to look in this temp workspace folder, and there should be a folder that contains all the folders and files that make up this project I've just created. And you'll recall that I named it Module 1 App, and you'll see that it's being created on January 17th, 2014. That's the project. If I open it, there is another project folder. Trust me, there are lots of folders and files inside of there, and these are all projects, or these are all files and folders that get created automatically by Visual Studio. But this one right here, where it says Module 1 App, is the file that is used to start up the project in the future. Okay, and I'll show you how that works here in a second. All right, so you can see evidence that we have saved our project. So as a routine matter, once you exit Visual Studio, you should go to the location in the file system where the project has been saved and copy it to some other storage device. So I'm just going to right click here and copy, and then go back to my computer, and I have inserted a USB drive, so I'm going to click on that and right click down here, I hope, and paste. And I'm pasting the entire project. So I take that entire outer folder, the one that appears in the temp workspace folder, and I paste the entire project folder. Now you won't go wrong if you follow the procedure that I've just gone through. when you're in Visual Studio and you're ready to quit, save everything by clicking on the tool that looks like a stack of disk icons, exit out of Visual Studio, go to the location in the file system where the project is stored, find the project folder, and copy it to some backup device. Alright, so we're going to pretend now that some time has elapsed. Okay, so it's the next day, for instance, and I want to go back and work on that project again. So how can I do that? Well, let's say that project is on my USB drive, but it's not on the current computer. Then I could insert the USB drive, go to the Start menu, choose Computer. Now, you could actually work on it directly from the USB drive. I think it's a little safer if we copy it to the hard drive of the computer we're using. And then if we mess something up, we still have that backup. So I'm going to do it using that technique. And I open my USB drive, I find the folder, and I'm going to copy that entire folder over to the computer's desktop. At which point I'll close up the window that represents my USB drive, and in the folder that I've just copied, I'm going to open it up. I find the .sln file, the solution file, and if I double click on it, it's going to open the project in Visual Studio again. Now normally what happens is when it opens this project again in Visual Studio, it doesn't automatically display Form 1 in the designer window. So you may have to go over to the Solution Explorer window. If you don't find that, if you look on the menu bar up here, there's a Solution Explorer icon. You can click that and generate this window. Likewise, there is a Property Windows tool. If you click that, it'll generate the Properties window that we looked at previously. But if I need to see that form, use that form, then I'm just going to go over to Solution Explorer, double click on Form 1, and there's my project again. And again, if I double click on the button, there's the code window, and everything I demonstrated previously applies, and I can continue to work and add maybe additional buttons and text boxes, do whatever I need to. I can continue to build upon what I had created previously. All right, so that is a quick overview of the really fundamental things that you need to know. And so at this point, you should know how to launch Visual Studio to create a Windows Forms application. And you should have some idea of how to interact with the components of Visual Studio to create objects on the form, and you should have some idea of how to then get to the code window where C#, your programming language code, can be inserted, and you should have an idea of how to save the project, how to get it backed up onto secondary storage, onto additional secondary storage. And then you should also know how to come back at some future point in time and access the previously saved project and continue working on it. So that's the material for Module 1, and have a good day.